Owning a diner had always been my dream. A dream I nurtured with every plate served, every coffee poured, and every kind word exchanged with the regulars. For nearly a decade, it was my second home, a haven of warmth and comfort. Locals gathered for breakfast, travelers sought a meal, and the hum of friendly conversation filled the air. I especially cherished the late nights when the rush faded, and I could sip a cup of tea, enjoying the quiet hum of the jukebox as I wrapped up the day's paperwork. But one Thursday night, my dream became a nightmare. It was a slow evening. By 8:30 p.m., the dinner crowd had thinned to nothing. The lingering scent of grilled burgers mixed with the soft tunes of the jukebox as Amy, my server, wiped down the counters, and Joe, our cook, scrubbed the grill. We laughed and joked about Joe's disastrous poker game last week and the quirks of our regulars. It was a normal, peaceful night. Then the bell above the door jingled. We all turned to see him. The man who entered looked off. His jacket hung loose, tattered and oversized, and his jeans were frayed at the hems. His eyes were sunken, the shadows beneath them stark against his pale skin, and his unkempt hair peeked out from beneath a baseball cap. He muttered something about coffee and slid into a booth near the window. Amy shot me a questioning look, but I nodded. "Just serve him," I whispered. She approached with her usual cheery demeanor, pouring a steaming cup from the pot she carried. "Waiting for a ride?" she asked casually. He didn't answer, just stared out the window, his hands wrapped around the mug. The coffee sat untouched. By 10 p.m. he was still there, unmoving, unblinking. "Sir, do you need anything else? We're closing soon," Amy tried again. Her voice faltered when he turned his head ever so slightly, giving her a blank, almost hollow stare. Joe finished cleaning and poked his head out of the kitchen. "Want me to stick around, boss?" he asked, jerking a thumb toward the man. I shook my head. "It's fine. You two can go. I'll handle him." Amy hesitated, her brows furrowing. "Are you sure? He's weird." "I'm sure," I insisted, even as unease prickled at the back of my neck. They left reluctantly, their laughter fading into the night. Now it was just me and him. At 11 p.m., I approached his booth. "Sir, we're closed now. If your ride hasn't arrived, there's a gas station down the road." "You think you can shut me out?" he interrupted, his voice rising. I blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" He stood suddenly, his height and presence oppressive. "You think you can take what's mine and get away with it?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, taking a step back. "You owe me," he roared, slamming his fists on the table. My heart pounded as I stumbled toward the counter. "Sir, I think you should leave now. If you don't, I'll call the police." "Go ahead," he shouted, his face contorting into a snarl. "They won't stop me." Gripping my phone with trembling hands, I dialed 911 and locked myself in the kitchen. "There's a man here," I whispered to the dispatcher. "He's acting aggressively, and I'm alone. Stay on the line. Officers are on their way." The voice on the other end reassured me. Through the small window in the kitchen door, I watched him pacing. His eyes darted around the diner before locking onto the cash register. He tried to open it, yanking the drawer with a feral intensity. When it wouldn't budge, his frustration boiled over. Grabbing a stool, he hurled it across the room, the crash echoing in the empty space. Then his gaze shifted to the kitchen door. "You can't hide forever," he bellowed, pounding on the door with enough force to make it rattle. I pressed myself against the far wall, clutching the phone as if it could shield me. His face appeared in the window, his wild eyes meeting mine. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his breath fogging the glass. Red and blue lights flooded the parking lot. He froze, turning toward the flashing lights outside. A moment later, he bolted for the door. I heard shouting, then the scuffle of feet as the officers tackled him to the ground. I stepped out of the kitchen only after the shouting had ceased. The officers stood outside, the man now handcuffed and cursing from the back of a patrol car. "Are you okay?" one officer asked me. I nodded shakily. "Yes, I think so." The officer explained that the man had been involved in several break-ins across town, often targeting businesses after hours. "You're lucky this ended without anyone getting hurt," he said. The word, lucky, echoed in my mind as I looked around the diner, now eerily silent. The familiar comfort of my sanctuary was gone, replaced by an oppressive weight I couldn't shake. The next day, I changed the way we closed up shop. No one would be left alone again. The bell above the door jingles differently now, and every shadow in the parking lot feels alive. Late-night diners were supposed to be warm, welcoming beacons in the darkness. I know better now. There's darkness everywhere. It just waits for the right moment to step inside. I had been working at the diner for about 6 months when it happened. It wasn't a dream job, but it was flexible enough to fit around my college schedule and paid just enough to keep my ancient Honda limping along. Most shifts were uneventful, running between tables, refilling coffee mugs, and juggling trays of greasy diner fare. But that night, a shift that started like any other twisted into something I'll never forget. The dinner rush had come and gone, leaving the diner bathed in the fluorescent hum of late-night quiet. A few regulars lingered at their booths, sipping coffee and murmuring softly. I was wiping down tables when I noticed him. He sat alone in the far corner, the shadows of the booth casting his face in faint relief. His hands were clasped tightly around a coffee cup, his shoulders hunched as if he were folding into himself. At first glance, he seemed ordinary, mid-40s, wearing a faded baseball cap. But something about him unsettled me. It wasn't until I caught him staring that the unease rooted itself. His gaze wasn't casual. It wasn't the absent, unfocused stare of someone lost in thought. It was sharp, deliberate, and heavy. Every time I glanced his way, his eyes were locked on me, unblinking. I tried to shake it off. People stare sometimes, I told myself, but this wasn't normal. I approached his table with a forced smile. "Need a refill?" He looked up, a thin smile spreading across his face. It didn't reach his eyes. "Busy night?" he asked, ignoring my question. "Not too bad," I replied, keeping my tone polite but distant. "You in school?" he pressed, his voice casual but his eyes. They were studying me. "Yeah, at the university," I answered automatically, regretting it the second the words left my mouth. "Must be tough," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Balancing all that work and study." I nodded stiffly. "Keeps me busy. Can I get you anything else?" "No," he said, his smile widening, revealing teeth that gleamed too white under the diner lights. "Just enjoying the view." The words chilled me. There was something in his tone, something calculated. I muttered a quick excuse and walked away, but I could feel his eyes following me, burning into my back. By midnight, the diner was nearly empty. I busied myself clearing plates and wiping counters, relieved when I noticed the corner booth was finally empty. He was gone. I finished my shift, cashed out my tips, and clocked out. The parking lot was deserted, the chill of the night air biting at my skin as I climbed into my Honda. I turned the ignition, the engine grumbling to life, and headed home, ready to collapse into bed. About 10 minutes into the drive, I noticed the headlights. At first, I thought nothing of it. Late-night traffic was rare but not unheard of. But the car stayed with me, matching my every turn. A knot of unease began to twist in my stomach. I told myself it was a coincidence. It had to be. Then I made another turn. And another. The car followed each one. My pulse quickened. Whoever it was, they weren't just heading in the same direction. They were following me. I grabbed my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? "I think someone's following me," I whispered, my voice barely steady. "They've been behind me for the last 15 minutes, matching every turn I make." "Where are you now?" the dispatcher asked. I gave her my location, glancing nervously at the rearview mirror. "Keep driving," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Head to the nearest police station. Officers will meet you there." I pressed harder on the gas, the darkened streets blurring as I sped towards safety. The car behind me didn't back off. Its headlights grew brighter, closer, until they were nearly blinding in my mirrors. I made another sharp turn, my tires screeching against the asphalt. The car followed, relentless. "You're doing great," the dispatcher reassured me. "Just a few more blocks." Finally, I saw it, the police station, its floodlights piercing through the darkness like a beacon. Relief flooded through me as I pulled into the lot. The car behind me slowed as I neared the entrance. For a moment, I thought they might follow me all the way in. But just as I parked, they turned sharply and sped off into the night. I stumbled out of my car, my legs trembling as I approached the station. A pair of officers met me at the door. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. I nodded shakily. "They're gone now. They turned off when I got here." The officers took my statement, but I could only give them a vague description. A dark sedan, maybe. Nothing that would help them track the driver. Driving home that night was like walking a tightrope of terror. Every set of headlights felt like a predator stalking me. Every turn a test of nerve. When I finally reached my apartment, I bolted the door, double-checked every lock, and sat in silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me. For weeks, the memory haunted me. The man in the diner hadn't just stared at me. He'd followed me, his intentions lingering like a shadow I couldn't shake. I changed my routines after that. Parked closer to the diner, avoided late shifts when I could, and always checked my mirrors. Late nights on quiet roads used to feel peaceful. Now they feel like a trap. I work as a manager at a diner, and every now and then, I take the night shift. Most nights, it's quiet. A mix of regulars unwinding and night owls grabbing a late bite. The calm gave me time to organize inventory and keep an eye on the floor, something I usually enjoyed. What I didn't enjoy, though, were the prank calls. They started about 3 months ago. At first, it was nothing unusual. Someone breathing heavily, laughing, and hanging up. It happened about once a week, always late at night, and I didn't think much of it. Probably some bored kid or someone looking for attention. But then the calls got specific. "Are you alone tonight?" the voice asked one night. The question caught me off guard. It wasn't loud or threatening. The voice was calm, steady, almost conversational. "Excuse me?" I said. The line went dead. I brushed it off as another prank, but that question started to become routine. Every few nights, the same voice would call, asking the same thing. "Are you alone tonight?" I tried having my staff answer the phone, but the caller seemed to know when it was me. They never said anything to anyone else, only to me. One Friday night, the diner was unusually quiet. Just 2 customers were there. An older couple sharing a milkshake in a booth, and a man sitting alone in the far corner. He'd been nursing a cup of coffee for over an hour, barely touching the slice of pie in front of him. Something about him felt off. He wasn't doing anything overtly strange, but his presence made my skin crawl. Then the phone rang. I hesitated before picking it up. "Main Street Diner, how can I help you?" "Are you alone tonight?" the voice asked. A chill ran down my spine. My eyes darted around the room. "Who is this?" I demanded. The caller chuckled softly. "Look to your left," they said. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner where the man was sitting. He was staring directly at me, a thin smile spreading across his face. My breath caught. I gripped the phone tightly. "Who are you?" I asked. The line went dead. The man's smile didn't falter. He didn't move, didn't wave, just kept smiling. I hung up the phone and forced myself to stay calm. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he wasn't the caller. But the sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I moved to the counter, pretending to busy myself with the coffee pot while keeping him in my peripheral vision. He was still staring. "Jess, you okay?" Brenda, one of my waitresses, asked as she came out of the kitchen. "Yeah, just a weird call," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Can you keep an eye on table 6 for me?" Brenda glanced at the man and raised an eyebrow. "What's going on with him?" "Just let me know if he leaves," I said, trying to sound casual. Brenda gave me a curious look but nodded and went back to wiping down the counter. A few minutes later, the man got up and walked toward the restroom. I felt a flicker of relief, hoping he'd finally leave. But as he passed by me, he stopped. "You should answer your phone," he said. his voice low and deliberate. I didn't respond. My heart was pounding as I watched him disappear into the bathroom. Moments later, the phone rang again. Main Street Diner, I answered, my voice shaky. You didn't ask if I'm still here, the voice said. I slammed the receiver down, my hands trembling. Brenda, I said, my voice firmer now. Call the police. Tell them we have a suspicious person here. What's going on? She asked, her eyes wide. Just do it, I said. While Brenda called the police, I stood by the counter, my eyes locked on the bathroom door, bracing for it to burst open. But it didn't. Within 5 minutes, 2 officers arrived. Brenda quickly explained the situation, pointing to the bathroom. One officer positioned himself near the door while the other called out, Sir, we need you to come out. There was a pause, then the sound of shuffling. The door creaked open, and the man stepped out. His expression was unsettlingly calm. The officers escorted him outside, questioning him on the sidewalk. Do you have any ID? One officer asked. The man shook his head. Do you have a phone on you? He patted his pockets theatrically before spreading his hands. Nope. They searched him but found nothing, no phone, no wallet, nothing. After a few minutes, they let him go with a warning to stay away from the diner. As he walked off into the night, he turned back once, his expression blank but unnerving. The next morning, I found something near the bathroom window. A cheap, cracked phone and a pair of scuffed wireless headphones. He must have tossed them out before the police arrived. I handed them over to the police, but they were untraceable. A burner phone, no distinguishing features on the headphones. Another dead end. Weeks later, the memory still lingers. I flinch whenever the phone rings late at night. The staff handles calls now. I can't bring myself to pick up. It's not always the loud threats or obvious dangers that haunt you. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments, the subtle, calculated ones, that stick with you the longest. It was another late-night shift at Lou's Diner, the kind I'd worked so many times it felt like second nature. Lou's wasn't anything fancy. Just a little roadside spot on the edge of town where regulars came for coffee and pie, and truckers stopped for burgers on their long hauls. By midnight, the last customer had wandered out, leaving me to close up shop. I didn't mind the quiet, the hum of the refrigerators, the buzz of fluorescent lights, and the occasional car rolling by outside had a way of grounding me after a busy shift. That night felt no different. I wiped down the counters, swept the floors, locked the cash register, and checked off my closing tasks one by one. When I headed toward the bathrooms to finish up, something caught my attention. A faint rustling sound coming from the back hallway. It was soft, like fabric brushing against tile. The men's room door was slightly ajar. That struck me as odd. I could have sworn I'd closed it earlier. Hello, I called, taking a cautious step closer. My voice echoed in the tiled hallway, but no one answered. Then I heard it again, but this time it wasn't just rustling. It was muttering, low and garbled, like someone talking to themselves. I hesitated. Sometimes, people slipped in before closing to find a warm spot for the night. It wasn't unheard of, but this felt different. Steeling myself, I pushed the door open. The restroom was empty, except for the last stall at the far end. This door was shut tight. Hey, the diner's closed. You can't be in here, I said, trying to sound firm. The muttering stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. I took a cautious step forward. Sir, do you need help? Suddenly, the stall door rattled violently, like someone had thrown their full weight against it. I stumbled back, my heart racing. Leave me alone, a man's voice growled. I can't let them find me. His voice was raw, desperate, almost unhinged. My stomach twisted as I realized this wasn't just someone looking for a place to crash. The diner's closed, I said, forcing calm into my voice. If you need help, I can call someone. The door rattled again, harder this time. The man shouted, his words incoherent and frantic. I backed out of the restroom. My pulse was hammering. I didn't know what he was running from or imagining, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. I grabbed the restroom key from my pocket and quickly locked the door from the outside. Then I bolted back to the counter and dialed 911, my hands trembling. "This is Chris, the manager at Lou's Diner. I've got a man locked in the bathroom. He's shouting and acting aggressively." The dispatcher assured me officers were on their way and told me to stay safe. Those 10 minutes felt like hours. Every so often, I'd hear him muttering or slamming against the stall door. His voice shifted between anger and fear, like he was arguing with someone who wasn't there. By the time the police arrived, the diner didn't feel like my familiar workplace anymore. It felt like a trap. The officers moved quickly. I handed them the restroom key and watched as they approached the door cautiously. "Sir, this is the police," one officer said firmly. "Step out of the stall with your hands visible." At first, there was nothing but silence. Then the muttering started again, louder and more frantic. The officer repeated the command, his tone sharper this time. Finally, the stall door creaked open, and the man stepped out. His wild, bloodshot eyes darted around the room, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been cleaned in weeks. "They're after me," he shouted, pointing at nothing in particular. "They're everywhere." The officers exchanged a quick glance. One gently guided the man out, speaking in a calm, steady tone. "We're going to help you. Let's get you somewhere safe." Once they had him outside, one officer stayed behind to take my statement. "Do you know him?" the officer asked. "No," I said, my voice still shaky. "He just kept saying someone was after him." The officer nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like he's mentally ill. We'll make sure he gets the help he needs." It made sense, but it didn't make me feel much better. The memory of his frantic shouting and the look in his eyes stuck with me long after he was gone. I locked up in record time that night, skipping my usual closing routine. The next morning, I called the owner and insisted on better security. Locks for the bathrooms after hours, brighter exterior lights, and maybe even cameras. Within a week, we had it all in place. It helped a little, but I still can't shake the unease I feel during those late shifts. Now, I keep my phone in my pocket, double-check the locks, and announce myself anytime I walk into an empty part of the diner. It's not fear exactly, it's caution. The kind you carry with you after seeing how quickly an ordinary night can turn dangerous. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button and subscribe for more eerie tales. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments. I could definitely use some backup tips. And hey, share this with your fellow night owls. Just don't forget to warn them about the bathrooms. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.